Hearts of Iron, but the viewers choose what I do, the last part. The fall of the Third French Empire. The 22nd December 1943, the French started the occupation of Catalonia and the Balearic Islands. This was seen by most democratic nations as an aggression, even the Greeks who left the French faction. This led to a collapse of the French faction and its puppet empire. The Italians, English, North Germans and Russians declared independence. The Turkish stayed with the French and took the opportunity that the Greeks had left to take back Ankara from them. The attack started in the morning and the Turkish infantry surrounded the city from 3 sides. But even though the attack was a surprise and the Turks outnumbered the Greek 3-1, the Greek forces with their superior training and equipment defended the city successfully. When the news about the attack reached the Greek Prime Minister, he got a mental breakdown. He didn't want to be at war with the French. He started to plan with some diplomats a new faction with the French. He planned to give away Ankara and some other parts of the Megali idea to appease the French and their Turkish puppet. Sadly for him, when his plan reached the Greek military, they weren't happy. The Greek general Alexandros Papagos, famous for capturing Istanbul during the Third Greco-Turkish War, declared martial law and disbanded the parliament with the help from the military. He officially declared war on the Turkish puppet state, ending the chance of a peaceful solution to the conflict. During the rest of the war, the Greeks would push the Turkish slowly but surely out of Anatolia. In Italy, Victor Emmanuel had declared independence from the French. His first goal to solidify his control was to recapture Rome. The French owned a small corridor from Rome to Piedmont. The corridor was lightly guarded and most guards were stationed in Rome and Genoa. This meant the Italians managed to quickly cut off Rome from its land supply lines. After that, they moved into Rome from all sides. The French defenders were only garrisons and had never fought in a battle before. They managed to successfully defend the attack from the north, but the Italians marched uncontrollably into Rome from the east and the south. When they had captured the city, they turned north and destroyed the French defenders. During the rest of the war, Italy would slowly take back northwestern Italy. They would ultimately get stopped around Turin and the Alps by the French defenders. On the British Isles, the English had declared its independence and sought to unite the Isles at the cost of Welsh and Scottish independence. As the conflict started, Admiral Bertram Ramsay developed a plan to deny any access of French reinforcements to the British Isles. But the French had prepared for this situation, and before the English navy could mobilize, the French had arrived in the harbors and destroyed most of the English navy. This meant that the French could send their troops to Britain. In Wales, the English advanced quickly with civilian vehicles and captured Newport, Cardiff and Swansea without any major resistance. In Scotland, they didn't have as much luck. The Scottish, eager to defend their independence, under French control, set up a successful defense of the hills in the southern uplands. But the English advanced slowly along the coast on the northern sea. In Edinburgh, the Scottish defences were weak as they had sent most of their men to defend the hills. But the French, having destroyed the English navy, could now send reinforcements. When the British had reached the small city of Dunbar, 2 French divisions with around 1,300 men each arrived. They had better equipment and training than the British and managed to counterattack. The attack pushed the English all the way back to England. During the rest of the war, the Scottish would reinforce their defensive positions, letting the French go back home defending their own land. Meanwhile, in the east, the Russian puppet monarchy declared its independence and sought to reclaim all Russian states. They attacked the French puppets of Finland, the United Baltic Nation, Ukraine and the Caucasus nations. The Russians started to advance in Ukraine and Finland before they had time to mobilize. But in the Caucasus they didn't manage to advance past the mountains because the Caucasus nations had fierce guerrilla fighters. Finland had been demilitarized after it became a French puppet because of fears of rebellion. This made it so that the Russians could easily take back Karelia and continue to Helsinki. While the Finnish had problems to mobilize, the Ukrainians had slowly built up an army after its independence, under French control, so they managed to successfully defend their northern states. But the Russians swept through the south. After that they moved north to help their army in the north. But they didn't count on Soviet intervention. After the Great Anti-Communist Crusade, Stalin retreated to the Urals with the Red Army. Now his army was ready to reclaim Russia. They quickly marched to capture the supply hubs in the region, but it would take time for them to reach Moscow. During the rest of the war, Russia would capture Finland and Ukraine, but meet a lot of rebellion in the areas. This weakened the Russian army and made it possible for the Soviets to advance and take back land. While the French slowly lost control all over Europe, in America they still had a well-equipped army ready to strike. They had just captured Washington and most of the West Coast before the collapse in Europe. The Americans saw their chance and attacked fully on all fronts, but they underestimated the French, who had destroyed big parts of their army before. They took back some land in the south where the French were weaker, but in the north the French launched a major counterattack and pushed the Americans even more inland. The French had now defeated the Americans, but instead of trying to take over everything, they dug in and sent home parts of their military to support the homeland. During the rest of the war, the Americans would try to take back territory, but fail every time. While all these fronts were important, none were as big of a threat for the French as the Prussian front. The Prussians had united with all of the northern kingdoms and thought to unify Germany once again. The Kingdom of Baden-Württemberg and the Kingdom of Bavaria wanted to keep their independence, so they stayed with the French. The Prussians mobilized a big army quickly with old equipment from the German kingdom. The Austrian and Czechoslovak army did also mobilize. The Prussian plan of action was to first take over southern Germany and then cut off the Benelux and march to Paris. The kingdoms in southern Germany were weak as they hadn't existed for so long, so they were quickly overrun by the Prussians and Czechoslovaks. The French had now started to mobilize its territorial guard along the Prussian border, but equipment was lacking and most of it was old. So the Prussians launched an offensive to take back the Rhineland. The French knew this would happen and started blowing up infrastructure and important industries. When the Prussians arrived to the Rhine, most bridges were destroyed except some where German partisans had risen up and taken over the bridges. So the Prussians could funnel troops over to the other side of the Rhine. They focused their troops in the area and captured more and more of West Rhineland. The more time went on, the stronger the Prussians became, while the French only had a limited amount of divisions. The Prussians now launched the next stage in their offensive. They broke through the French line and advanced deep into Belgium and northern France. This was the first time French land had been lost in such a long time, so morale among the French soldiers in France plummeted. The 14th of May 1944, the Prussians reached Paris once again after 74 years. The French Empire had fallen and the French surrendered. But not all. Napoleon and his entourage fled to America. There they would continue to fight the Americans and build up a government in exile. In Europe, the winning powers would try their best to restore the old borders and free nations that were taken over by the French. There are still a lot of conflicts, especially in Russia, but that's how the French Empire ended. Thank you so much everyone who has been following this series and supported my channel. I hope to see you in Season 2 of Hearts of Iron, but the viewers choose what I do.